Yeah.
Okay. So today we're going to do the thorax and respiratory system. Some of this stuff you've actually heard before in histo. So the histo slides that are on this lecture I'm not really going to dive into because you guys have already gotten that curriculum. It's more of a review for you guys to look back at. So here we have objectives that you guys can use to guide you through your studying. So the respiratory system, we all know, consists of both our lungs and the pathway to our lungs for air to get into our body and out of our body, right? Makes sense for us to breathe. We have air conduction, air filtration, and gas exchange that occurs through our respiratory system into our body, okay? In addition to those things, we also have speech, so talking and moving of muscles of our larynx are also involved with the respiratory system. As air passes through, our muscles contract so that we can have different inflections and tones. Did we forget it was in here? Did we forget it was in here? Oh, okay, cool. We just all were wondering where you guys were. And then we also have olfaction. We breathe through our nose, right? And that's where our smell is, so it's involved. And as the air passes through our nose, we have the olfactory epithelium that transmits the sense of smell. Okay. We have two parts of our respiratory system. This should sound very familiar to you. Yes? From histology, okay? We have our conducting division and we have our respiratory division. Our conducting division is the first part, and then as we dive deeper, we have our respiratory division. So our conducting division is made up of our nose, so our nasal cavity that we kind of looked at last block, right, with the concha, our pharynx, our larynx, and into our trachea. We even go into the bronchi and bronchioles, and then we switch over to our respiratory division, where we have our respiratory bronchioles, our alveolar ducts, our alveolar sacs, and our alveoli. So do you guys know the difference between the two? It's on the next slide, but what is the main purpose of the respiratory division?
Gas exchange.
Gas exchange. Good, on top of it. Okay, and then the conducting division is how air passes through. So our conducting division is our air passage that leads to the areas of gas exchange, okay? And then our respiratory division is where actual gas exchange occurs between the airway and the lungs. Do you guys have any questions? Okay. So our functions of our nose, we have a couple of functions. So we've talked a lot about airway, we breathe through our nose. It also helps moisten and warm the air that comes in and filter some of it, like the hairs in our nose help to filter air that's coming in. We talked about how our olfactory epithelium covers like almost 80% of our nasal cavity, which is a huge amount of olfactory epithelium to bring in that sense of smell. And that's just a tiny bit compared to like other animals. Other animals have like a larger sense of smell than we do. And then we also resonate sound. So like when your nose is blocked, your speech is changed, right? You guys have had like, I don't know, plug noses, like sound nasally. So we modify speech based on our nose, okay? We have into our nose, we have our external nares, the outer, like these, right here. So that's where air comes in, that's its like doorway into our nose or our nasal cavity. We have our concha, right? And we looked at our concha. Our concha are the superior, middle, and inferior. We saw the bone, right, in the skull. Do you guys know that? Yeah. Okay. And then we have our nasal meatuses. So our meatuses are located underneath our concha, okay? Our meatuses, they're kind of these grooves that air passes through. We also have our sinuses that drain into our meatuses, right? We talked kind of about like our maxillary ostium, where our maxillary sinus drains into our middle meatus. And then we have our internal nares, which is like the most posterior aspect of our nasal cavity. It's basically the opening into our pharynx, which is located most posteriorly. So if we look at, so we have our external nares kind of over here where our nostrils are. Let's see over here. Okay, We have our external nares here. Then we are in the nasal cavity, and we have a superior, middle, and inferior concha. Underneath each concha is its corresponding meatus. So the superior meatus, our middle meatus, and our inferior meatus are located just under the concha. Okay, that makes sense? Mm-hmm. And then we go past there and we have our internal nare, which is the opening into our nasopharynx. This whole area back here is our pharynx, leading right into our larynx. Okay, so this is just another image. In this image, you can actually see our your concha from a view, a cross section, and then we also have over here our epithelium has been taken off of our concha, and you can actually see the bones. So our superior, middle, and inferior concha, and then you can see the openings that I'm talking about from our sinuses. That makes sense? So like here, your frontonasal sinus or duct that drains the frontal sinus. Our maxillary ostium would be like right in here. And we kind of saw, do you guys remember that the real bone that had the maxillary sinus very clear and defined? I kind of carried it around, and how it opened into the nasal cavity. So our maxillary ostium would be coming in right in here and draining into our nose. That's why when you lay on one side, when you have a clogged nose and it drains, have you ever done that sleeping and you lay on one side and the one side of your nose clears up, and then you lay on the other side and you lose the ability to breathe for a second? It's fun. Okay, so we go from our nasal cavity into our pharynx, and our pharynx is more posterior, right? And it's also superior to our larynx, okay? So it begins behind our internal nares, and it basically connects the nasal cavity to the oral cavity all the way down to our larynx, where air is going to go into the larynx and then the trachea, right? So we have, in our pharynx, we not only have air going through, but we also have food, because our nasal and oral cavities are connected. Okay, so we have our part of our pharynx called the oropharynx. These terms should all sound very familiar because I know Dr. Bergen covered them in histo, right? Okay. We have sound as our muscles contract, and then our tonsils are also located in our pharynx, and we have 3 sets of tonsils, right? And they're are part of our immunoresponse, okay? So our pharynx borders, so the most superior border is our sphenoid bone. So we have right here, this is our sphenoid sinus, so this is the sphenoid bone. Our internal nares are not, I don't think, depicted on this image, but it would be right here. Okay, the most posterior aspect of our nasal cavity. So this is where the pharynx begins, from our sphenoid bone all the way down to our esophagus, which comes down to here. So just past, basically where the trachea begins and no longer is larynx, okay? Posteriorly, we have our cervical vertebrae, and then anteriorly, we have our nasal cavity, our oral cavity, and our opening into our larynx. Okay, so our nasopharynx, this is, I think, this slide might be almost exactly the same slide as what was in histology, minus maybe the type of epithelium that's located in there, right? Okay, so our nasopharynx should be air only,